Was there an Adam? Was there an Eve? Or did we evolve from what we conceived? Either way, we got what we needed when the sun shone down on the Garden of Eden.
Don't you know we're gonna have a Solartopia, Solartopia, Solartopia. Don't you know we're gonna have a Solartopia all over God's green world?
Well, we bit that apple and the garden was lost, and so we had to work to pay the cost. And so we went digging into the ground and started to burn many things we found.
Oh, yeah.
Don't you know we're
Started to
gonna
burn too many things we found. That's the great Dora Williams singing with Pete Seeger, the legend Pete Seeger and David Burns, who wrote the words to that song, except for one, Solartopia. I wrote that one. I'm Harvey Sluggo Wasserman. We are here for another hour. We got a whole hour on the Green Powered and Wellness Show, the Solartopia Green Power and Wellness Show. We're going to talk about nuclear power. Huge fight in Ohio now, and we are privileged to have with us a legend, KARL GROSSMAN, talking to us from Long Island, one of the truly great leaders and pioneers and writers and professors of the anti-nuclear movement. KARL, you're with us, yeah?
I'm right here, Harvey. A pleasure to be with you.
Absolutely an honor to have you on. And Joe DeMARE, are you with us?
I am. Yes, thank you for having me.
You are in Toledo, right?
Just south, little city called Bowling Green.
Oh, Bowling Green. I know Bowling Green. You got 4 windmills in Bowling Green, or is it 6 now?
No, it's 4. The first utility-scale turbines that went up in Ohio went up right here in Bowling Green. We also have the largest solar field in the state of Ohio right now.
Really? Cool. And how are those windmills doing?
They're doing great. They paid themselves off early. They're now generating power at half the market rate. The only problem is that we only have 4 of them, and we need more.
Well, I want to ask you a serious question, and then we're going to get to Pat MARIDA and to KARL. How many fish have those windmills killed?
How many fish?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have exact numbers, Harvey, but it's right around 0. Yeah.
Well, I think that is an exact number, right? I mean, all these morons are running around telling us how many birds windmills kill, and then they say, well, you have to have nuclear power because nuclear power kills fewer birds. They don't admit to any, but they kill fewer birds than windmills. But windmills that I know of have never killed a fish. Maybe a flying fish.
Right.
What do you think? No.
Yeah,
okay,
well, actually, Davis-Besse kills 3,000 birds a year with its cooling tower. So,
yeah. And then
so Davis-Besse is not innocent here.
It microwaves them right on the spot. Pat MARIDA, have you made it? Pat MARIDA, you with us?
Yes. Hi, Harvey. It's a pleasure to be on with you and your distinguished guests.
Yes. Well, I want to thank Jesse and the studio there for getting everybody together. We're going to have a great hour here and infuriating. So those of you who really care about these things, you may want to take your blood pressure medicine because what's happening in Ohio is astounding. But so we're going to start with the grand old man of the anti-nuclear movement here. KARL, I think you may actually be older than me. It's hard to imagine. But and you have been with this an incredibly long period of time with tremendous effectiveness. So you just celebrated an anniversary there on Long Island in terms of the what happened at the Shoreham nuclear plant many years ago. Do you want to talk to us about it? Because we need some inspiration to get these nuclear reactors shut in Ohio. So tell us what went on there in Shoreham that we're celebrating.
Well, it was a great success almost exactly 40 years ago. And I did an article, it was out yesterday in Counterpunch. So listeners can go to counterpunch.org and see my piece. What occurred on June 3rd, 1979, was a massive rally, a massive protest. And you opened the show with Pete Seeger singing Solartopia. Well, he was there serenading the 15,000 people on the beach in front of the construction site for the Shoreham nuclear plant. 600 people went over the fence, got arrested as to show their commitment against nuclear power. One of them, incidentally, was my son, Kurt. And importantly, it wasn't just on Long Island, Shoreham, that was involved in this huge drive to bring nuclear power to Long Island. There were to be 7 to 11 nuclear plants on Long Island. It would be kind of the configuration that exists in Fukushima, with Fukushima Daiichi and Fukushima, I'm not pronouncing it right, Daini, just a few miles to its south. Long Island was going to be turned into what the nuclear promoters at the time, the parlance they used was a nuclear park. There was to be 3 at Shoreham, 4 east of Shoreham and Jamesport, others in between, sucking out water from the Long Island Sound. I mean, a nuclear plant requires 1 million gallons of water a minute. And also, down near where I live in the Hamptons, the utility, the Long Island Lighting Company, eyed building a nuclear plant in Bridgehampton. In any case, this rally was critical. It just showed what the people of Long Island thought about nuclear power and how they were willing to put their bodies on the line. And also, importantly, that protest, that rally was organized by the Shared Alliance, Sound Hudson Against Atomic Development, the Shared Alliance. And the Shared Alliance was committed to, direct action, civil disobedience. On the other hand, there were others involved in the fight against Shoreham who considered other strategies, litigation, and that became very important. Political action, getting the pro-nuke politicians out of office. And ultimately, what actually stopped Shoreham dead was the use of the state power or the governmental power of condemnation. When the nuclear juggernaut got itself going back in the late 40s, early 50s, what the federal government did was to preempt localities on many nuclear issues. But one they weren't able to preempt on was the matter of condemnation. A government can, for example, if a government wants to widen a road and somebody doesn't want to sell her or his land for the road widening project, the government can go in and condemn that property under eminent domain. Well, ultimately, in 1985, the Long Island Power Act was passed by the state legislature and signed into law by then-Governor Mario Cuomo. And what it provided for was if LUCO wouldn't give up Shoreham, wouldn't give up its scheme to build all these nuclear plants on Long Island, the state of New York, through an entity that was created, the Long Island Power Authority, would move under eminent domain and eliminate LUCO as a corporate entity. And as a result, LUCO, the utility, just gave up, even though the chairman, chief executive officer of the time was a guy who loved nuclear power, William Catacasinos, who had been the assistant director at Brookhaven National Laboratory on Long Island, which was established in 1947 to develop civilian uses of nuclear power. They turned over Shoreham for $1 to the state for decommissioning as a nuclear facility, and they gave up on the scheme to build all these other nuclear plants, and then later the 2 nuclear reactors at Brookhaven Lab were shut down. So the story involves the folks on Long Island fought City Hall and won, and they did it together in a big tent approach, even though various groups and people had different ideas of what the best strategy would be. There was no fighting between the various groups and the folks involved. They joined in a big tent and they defeated what would have been a nuclear nightmare for Long Island.
Unbelievable. I want to give you a standing ovation. It's fantastic. So, and I remember when Shoreham went down. I remember the big demonstration. I wasn't there, but I was certainly there in spirit. I was more up in the Seabrook area, and it's fantastic, Carl, what you did. So that would be 1979, right? That was the year we did the concerts in Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, and 3 Mile Island had just happened, in March, and a few months before, and that really, it demonstrated the lethal danger of nuclear power, and showed that the claim of the nuclear promoters that nuclear power is safe was just baloney. And yes, it was 79. It was an important year, and again, we won. I also might note I'm a professor of journalism, and one of the real downsides in regard to the Shoreham nuclear plant fight was the behavior of some of the most important media in the United States. The New York Times, for example, and the Long Island newspaper Newsday crusaded endlessly in support of Shoreham, in support of nuclear power, and just repeated the lies of these nuclear Pinocchios claiming nuclear was safe and economical and so forth. As a journalist myself with a column syndicated in a lot of the smaller newspapers on Long Island, I was able to bring out the truth about Shoreham and these other nuclear plants that Lilco wanted to build. And, even though I'm not the New York Times, I'm not Newsday, that information got through, that still small voice of truth. What did Ibsen say? Truth is a lion in the street, helped too. So it was altogether a success story, which I believe can be repeated and must be repeated all over the country, all over the world, to shut down every nuclear plant that exists today, near 500 around the world, and not let any new ones be built, and instead have the country, have the world focus on Solartopia, on safe, clean, renewable energy, solar in particular, wind, and other forms of safe, green energy that we can live with.
Absolutely. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to have a classroom exercise here. We've got Joe DeMARE and Pat MARIDA, two great activists from Ohio, from which I hailed, and we are in the midst of a huge nuclear fight in Ohio to stop a bailout. And this is a critical confrontation. And Joe and Pat, you've heard from the grand old man about how we won in Shoreham, and you're talking to another not so grand old man, me. But Pat, will you lay out, and then Joe, what's going on in Ohio and how you think we can proceed, and then we'll let Carl comment on the situation. So let's start with Pat, and then we'll go to Joe, and let's run this through, because we got the time, and we can come up with a strategy here. So Pat, tell us what's going on.
Okay, so I chair the Ohio Sierra Club's Nuclear Free Committee. So we've been heavily involved with this First Energy's attempt for a bailout for their nuclear plants, and it took the form of Ohio House Bill 6, which it's going to bail out First Energy without any, it's just a simple gift to them. And it's probably going to be around $200 million a year, although the figure keeps changing as the bill keeps changing. So it's constantly morphing. It's difficult to tell what's happening to it. One of the terrible things about this bill is that not only bails out nuclear, but it also puts a stop to and makes voluntary or even completely deep sixes renewable energy and efficiency. And so they had hearings in the House. The committee, Energy Public Utilities Committee, or a Natural Resources Committee in the House passed it. It passed the House, and now it is in the Senate Energy and Public Utilities Committee. And so I've testified 4 times against it. I think Joe's testified a number of times. And our energy expert and conservation chair from the Ohio Sierra Club, Ned Ford, he really understands the grid and has tried to explain a lot of the different implications of this bill. I mean, these legislators that are writing this bill, Ned doesn't know who's writing it, but they don't seem to have any sense at all about what the outcome of this could end up being. They're just making energy policy by making changes, and we don't even know what we're what we're testifying about.
Well, Pat,
Joe DeMARE, you want to continue with Pat?
Yeah, I think you're being a little bit charitable there in assuming they don't know what they're doing. Cause,
well, here, let me
just
lay this out.
Yeah.
Joe, before you proceed, you're right that Pat is being charitable. These people are a bunch of corrupt morons, okay? These people make Trump look intelligent. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, that kind of sets up what I'm about to say, because I think what happened in the House testimony is that organization after organization and person after person got up there and said, don't eliminate this bill also eliminates Ohio's efficiency standards, and it eliminates Ohio's renewable energy portfolio and replaces it with this charge on everyone's bill. And this House people listened to this hours of testimony. I mean, hundreds of people testified on this. And then they wrote the final version of the bill, basically took what everyone was telling them and did exactly the opposite. And so the current version eliminates Ohio's renewable portfolio standard, which will cost Bowling Green, for example, because we get those credits for our wind and our solar, it's going to cost our city $1 million a year. That's just one side effect. They removed all the good stuff, and then they specifically said that nuclear is clean energy, and then they also added all kinds of restrictions on wind power that make it literally just about impossible to put up a wind turbine in the state of Ohio if this passes. And just one example of how deliberate and biased this is that they specifically say in this bill that local municipalities can create more restrictive laws on wind turbines than the state laws, but they can't put more restrictive laws on anything else. And for example, they list you can't put more restrictive laws on cell towers, and right now they're trying to pass a bill saying that municipalities can't put more restrictive laws on, let's say, single-use plastics. But specifically in this bill, they say you can get as restrictive as you want on wind turbines. And so this is a very deliberate attempt to take the money away from wind and solar and true renewables and give it to nuclear power and coal power. And one of the coal plants that's going to benefit from this isn't even in Ohio; it's in Indiana. So this is a very deliberate attempt to reverse Ohio's course in terms of renewable energy.
Sometimes I think, having lived in Ohio all those years, I mean, going into the State House is like entering the night of the living dead. I mean, I think that somewhere along the line, it became a requirement that before you got into the legislature, you had to have a lobotomy. I mean, this is just, some of the stuff I didn't know. I mean, we do have in Ohio, and Carl, you may not know this, this infamous setback clause. Joe, do you want to tell us what the setback clause is?
Well, sure. The setback clause was established in 2014, and it literally froze all wind farm development in the state of Ohio because it said that in order to put up a turbine, you had to have about a quarter mile from the location of the turbine to the nearest property line, which means that you have to own piece of property that's at least a half a mile in each direction. And if you have that much land, you can only put one turbine right in the middle. And it's higher than any of the surrounding states where wind power has kept developing. And it's unnecessary. I mean, nowhere else in the world is this kind of a setback being promoted, because it just literally it stopped wind farms.
And about $4 billion worth of wind farms, right?
That's right. There were $4 billion worth of wind farms in the pipeline. You know, leases being signed, wind studies being done, locations being mapped out. They were in the process of happening, and this stopped them. This cost Ohio $4 billion in investment, which is still sitting out there in limbo. But if House Bill 6 passes, it will pretty much eliminate them, because no developer is going to risk their capital in a state that is openly hostile regulatorily to wind power.
Where is this coming from? Have you tracked the roots of this insane opposition to wind power?
Yes, the roots were very clearly laid out in Cleveland media, Cleveland.com. First Energy had asked for this bailout last year, and they didn't get it. And so what they did then is they picked 12 Ohio House members, and they targeted them with sufficient donations to in the Republican primaries that 11 out of those 12 won, and they replaced the incumbent Republicans. And then those are the 12, that's the core, that then pushed this bill through. Plus, they donated tons of money to Larry Householder, who's the Speaker of the Ohio House. So literally, this is coming from First Energy. They did a very deliberate targeting of legislatures with donations in order to put them in place in order to pass this law. That's where this is coming from.
If I could just jump in here. I know Ohio pretty well. I mean, I'm from New York City, but I went to Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio, and actually I was inspired to get into journalism by an internship that Antioch provided at the then Cleveland Press. And in fact, that was this wonderful crusading newspaper under Louis Seltzer, which got me into coming back to New York and becoming an investigative journalist. Nevertheless, this stupidity that you're discussing in regards to Ohio and safe energy actually has its roots here in purportedly sophisticated New York. The whole, it's such a lie. The whole claim that nuclear power is safe, renewable, clean, actually has been percolating in New York, and it was in 2016 where the first major bailout scheme for nuclear power plants was developed here in New York. And the deal involved 4 decrepit upstate nuclear power plants near the cities of Rochester and Syracuse, which weren't making money. And now with renewables out there, and particularly solar and wind, I mean, the economy of nuclear power is nowhere. And however, instead of letting these plants die as they should, just fall because of the reality of these economic pressures, what occurred was that being worked on at the time, this is again 3 years ago, was a clean energy standard for New York, under which by the year 2030, 50% of electricity in the state would come from clean and renewable energy sources. What occurs is that the governor, this is Mario Cuomo's son, Andrew Cuomo, then through the New York State Public Service Commission, its members appointed by no other than Andrew Cuomo, allowed nuclear power to be part of this clean energy standard, being defined as, yes, clean and renewable, and for a surcharge to be imposed on all ratepayers in New York, a huge surcharge, $7.6 billion. $7.6 billion over a 12-year period to, well, it's a giveaway, particularly to Exelon, which it's the major nuclear interest of the state. Well, here's a piece I'm reading here from Oswego County Today. Exelon reportedly met regularly with Cuomo administration officials as state regulators developed this scheme. And this scheme, which is costing folks in New York, I mean, it's on everybody's bill, and not just their own personal bill, but schools and businesses and governments also are hit with this surcharge. And those costs are, well, everybody ends up having to pay it. That it's just deplorable, outrageous scheme.
A surcharge on every single electric bill to go directly to the full plant.
It starts in New York and has been emulated in now states throughout the country, and it's an outrage. And part of the big push now too is that with climate change, nuclear power is necessary. Not only that it's safe and renewable, that baloney, but it's good for dealing with climate change because nuclear plants don't emit greenhouse gases. What the nuclear pushers don't want to say is that nuclear plants themselves actually emit radioactive carbon, and they also produce levels of carbon gases. But the nuclear fuel cycle is very greenhouse gas intensive. The mining, the milling, the enrichment. So, nuclear plants are not an answer whatsoever to climate change, and real renewable energy is. And so that's part of the scheme now to somehow convince people. I mean, years ago, they claimed nuclear would be too cheap to meter. I mean, every decade there's been a new scheme of pushing pro-nuclear propaganda, and now it has to do with this lie about climate change. But in any case, what began in New York has like the measles spread around the United States.
Yeah, and I want to point out, just in passing here, that wind power actually has become too cheap to meter. In Texas at night, there's so much wind power that you can actually run your washing machine and your TV and charge your car for free because they can't. There's so much wind power, they got to get it off the grid. And so, ironically, of all things, in Texas, wind power has become too cheap to meter. So, Joe, you were going to jump in and say a few things about the realities of the Ohio ripoff here, which in some ways are even worse than what's going on in New York. Go ahead and please jump in on that.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to concur that Ohio is following the New York blueprint, in that what this does is it adds a charge to every single electric bill in Ohio in order to give that money directly to the nuke plants and the coal plants that they've picked out here. And the bill is 167 pages long, and it's filled with individual bits of pork that go to specific projects, and it's an incredible blueprint for corruption. It's kind of this is how you steal money from the ratepayers and from the state of Ohio. It's amazing.
Pat, you want to jump in? Pat Marida? Pat, are you still with us? Pat Marida? Oh, she's not here anymore. She was having trouble with her phone. Okay, so here's the deal. I think, Carl, the New York bill, let's try and pull this apart. The New York bill is being challenged in court. Is that right?
Yes. A very important lawsuit is now underway. In fact, I was with Susan Shapiro, one of the attorneys in this lawsuit. It was, challenged this bailout scheme immediately, and there was an attempt by Exelon to throw it out of court, but just, last year, a judge said, no, we're going to have a trial. So a trial is going to be held about the illegal manner in which the bailout was imposed on the ratepayers in New York. A main plaintiff is Clearwater. The Nuclear Information and Resource Service is involved. Beyond Nuclear, the organization Beyond Nuclear is involved. There's dozens of organizations involved. And the question is whether through litigation, I mean, $1 billion has now been stolen from ratepayers in New York in this $7.6 billion bailout scheme. Whether it can, now we're a bit down the road, we're 3 years down the road, whether it can be stopped. And just let me note, Susan, at an event I was at in New York, appealed to people to help financially support this David and Goliath legal battle. And if listeners would like to help financially support it, just go to the website of clearwater.org, and there's a page in which you can contribute funding. It's a nonprofit, a 501c3. But in any case, it's in the courts now, this bailout scheme.
Well, why is there a chance to overturn this in New York by referendum?
Well, New York has had referenda, but it's not a big initiative in referendum state. And the strategy that was utilized here to stop it was initially having legislators in New York do something about it, the Assembly and the State Senate and so forth, trying to stop it. And that just didn't work out. And the next step was litigation. Meanwhile, there's been demonstrations. I've covered them as a journalist, protests and so forth. So there's been grassroots action as well. But again, in New York, which is too bad, referenda haven't been something that's been central to New York State governance.
Well, is it a possibility? I mean, all right, well, let's talk with Joe DeMARE about this. Joe, you and I have been discussing potential strategies. It's not really assumed 100% that the state Senate is going to pass this, or if they do pass something, what it will be. I assume if they pass something different from what the House passed, there'll have to be a reconciliation, right?
Right. They'd have to have a reconciliation bill. The latest word, and the rumors fly daily and things change by the hour, but the latest is that they're going to vote on this coming Tuesday. And I think that in the Akron Beacon Journal, the person who chairs the committee that's considering this right now, the Senate Energy Committee, floated the idea of just giving First Energy its bailout and stripping all the other stuff, and not removing the renewable portfolio, not eliminating the efficiency standards, not creating this Ohio Air Quality Development Authority, which is supposed to be able to make loans to build new nuclear plants. So that might be that might be what is going to shake out of this, is that First Energy will just get the bailout it wanted, the bailout that it's spending all this. It spent over $4 million on ads and TV and radio promoting this bill, and yet still all the latest poll results are that 70% of Ohioans still oppose it. So Ohioans can smell a rat here, and they're not falling for it. So I don't know what it's going to finally look like, but it's that idea has been floated that they would just give the bailout and not do all the other horrible things, which is still unacceptable. The bailout by itself is unacceptable. So, Ohio has a pretty good history of passing referendum. That's how we got our. We just had a referendum last year on rights of prisoners, and we had a referendum on marijuana, and so we things do get done by referendum fairly often in Ohio.
Yeah, I heard the marijuana initiative went down because everybody was too stoned to get to the polls. But so I think, well, here, and Carl, you'll be interested to hear this. We've been having conversations. Some of the major opponents of this bailout are the oil and gas industry and even the coal industry. And then there are also major manufacturing industries in the state that are really not happy about this because they don't want to see their electric rates go up. Is that right, Joe?
That's right. There's supposedly going to be a cut because they won't have to pay the renewable and the efficiency charges anymore, but it charges everybody by meter. And so if you're an industrial user that's got 10 or 20 electric meters, you get charged this fee on every single meter. So for a lot of manufacturers, their costs will go up. And of course, not being able to do efficiency programs will increase their overall spending because they won't be able to get the loans now that have been funding things like more efficient equipment and more efficient lighting and insulation and things that have reduced their bills. So yeah, everybody's going to pay more in this.
Here in New York, because of this bailout, in terms of the development of truly clean energy, renewable energy, the money that would go to support wind and solar has just been sucked away and sent to the nuclear industry. I mean, over 90% of we're talking about the money that was raised under this Clean Energy Standard program has gone to nuclear. By putting in money in this dying industry, nuclear, we're really depriving the new and so promising industry of safe, clean energy the funding that would truly help it out. And if I could just go on in terms of the economics, I mean, nuclear plants are not just uneconomical, totally uneconomical these days to run, but to build. I mean, the original price tag that the utility put on the Shoreham nuclear plant was $65 million. When it was finally completed, and it was run for low-power testing for a while before it was stopped, it was closed, the final cost of Shoreham was somewhere between 6.5 and 7.5.
Hello?
These days, the only two nuclear power plants, new ones being built in the United States, are the Vogtle nuclear power plants in Georgia. Each one is to cost $13 billion. I mean, again, this is a totally uneconomical technology.
Yeah, and it's a total scam. In Ohio, Joe DeMARE, we actually have quite a few people working in the wind industry making components. Is that right?
That's right. It's kind of ironic. We actually are the state that has the second highest number of people making things like solar panels and wind turbine blades, and but none of those wind turbine blades are being used in Ohio. It's kind of crazy. And Carl and Harvey, I actually have been not as prominent or anything in the nuclear anti-nuclear movement, but I've been a part of it for my whole adult life, and I just wanted to say that you guys could probably back this up, that this is what nukes always do, that every time wind and solar start gaining traction the way they did with back in the Carter days, the nukes step forward and just suck up the money. They'd just say, oh, we're the alternative energy. This is not a new pattern.
No, the nuclear industry is terrified of renewable energy, as are the coal, oil, and gas guys. It's King Kong, coal, oil, nukes, and gas. And they're all in it together, and they're all terrified of renewables, because renewables, put them out of business, and B, completely change the paradigm of who's got the power in this country. Because, with wind and solar, local people can own their own power supply, and that is absolutely the last thing that the King Kong, coal, oil, nukes, and gas, can even begin to contemplate. So, it's Carl?
And further, Harvey, the sun doesn't send a bill. I mean, I'm sitting here talking to you from my old salt box, turn of the century, last century, 1900, house in Sag Harbor, New York, way out on the east end of Long Island. And the roof of the house, with these salt boxes, you have these south-facing big roofs, are 38 solar panels, photovoltaic panels. And it's amazing. I can walk out, even today, it's a cloudy day in New York and rain some of the day, and look at I'm connected to the grid, and the excess electricity goes back into the grid, and you get money for the excess electricity that you produce, and constantly, including today on a gray day, go over to that meter, it'll be running backwards. Furthermore, a product of the sun, wind, is also, it doesn't send any bills. Last year, I took a trip to, here in New York, it's a little different from Ohio because our big area for wind energy is the sea. It's offshore wind. And I went out to the first wind farm built here on the Atlantic. It's off Block Island. And there's this collection of these wind turbines, their blades moving slowly. Birds aren't going to get caught up in those blades. They just move very gracefully, very slowly, with a very small footprint. And now the plan is, if there'll be enough money for it, to move forward with more offshore wind off New York City, off Long Island, off New Jersey, and so forth. So, we could get, through the technologies of today, the energy technologies today, all the energy we ever need, safe energy, which relegates nuclear power to the ash heap. And what we're seeing with these bailouts that we're discussing in this program is like this dying gasp of the nuclear industry to somehow have us pay, because Wall Street won't touch nuclear anymore, to have us, the ratepayer, and these loan guarantees that the government has set up to pay for, again, this dying industry to somehow keep going.
Yeah, I just want to say real quickly, there's this whole cult of people running around saying that nuclear power somehow fights global warming. Nuclear power at the moment is 440 atomic fires burning around 300 degrees centigrade minimum in their reactor pressure vessels, completely heating the planet. For an environmentalist to say they favor nuclear power is like a pacifist saying they support nuclear war. It's utterly ridiculous. And 5 of these reactors have already exploded. God knows when the next one's going to be. And so enough of that nonsense already. Joe DeMARE, Carl is talking about wind power. We are offshore wind. Tell us about what's happening in Lake Erie.
There is a on the water project planned for Lake Erie, and it has some of the best wind in the country. And the studies, the siting board, I believe the siting board just approved it, so it may well happen, and hopefully it will happen. And it's something that, since it's a freshwater body, it's much easier to do it than it is on the ocean, and the grid is much closer. You don't have to go miles out in the ocean before you can run the cable back to hook up with the grid. And it's going to happen outside of near Cleveland, and it's going forward, and it's going to be great.
How big is the project currently slated for Lake Erie? This one.
I don't have that number off the top of my head, Harvey. I'm sorry, but it's
okay. So
it's substantial.
The advantage that Lake Erie, and this is the first. My understanding is that these will be the first freshwater turbines in the country, maybe even in the world. I'm not sure, because Lake Erie has incredible wind. I mean, if you look at the wind maps of the world, Lake Erie's wind is it's like purple. It's like as strong as it gets. And as you mentioned, the fresh water is a huge benefit because saltwater, even at this late date, and Carl, you'll keep an eye on this, of course. They haven't really solved 100% the corrosion problem. Salt is incredibly difficult to counteract, and the ocean wind turbines are still being plagued by salt. So, Carl, that's going to be a problem off the Long Island that we don't really have in Ohio, because the problem you do have in Ohio, which is different from the ocean, is that the water does freeze in the winter, and so you get icebergs bumping up against the turbine base, and that doesn't unless you're in the Arctic. That doesn't happen in the ocean. But
I do know, Harvey, that at the other end of Lake Erie, at Buffalo, there are a number of turbines that have been developed right along the shore there on the breakwaters, and those, as I understand it, those are performing at or above the predicted levels. That they're generating tons of power very effectively and very cleanly. So I do know one example on Lake Erie where it has been done already and worked.
But I don't think those are actually in the lake, are they?
Well, they're on the breakwaters, so they're not. Yeah, they're not. They get lake water splashes on them. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I remember in 1975, before you were born, Joe. There was a Toward Tomorrow fair in Amherst, Massachusetts. And it pains me to say the name Amherst, Massachusetts, because that place needs to be renamed because Lord Jeffrey Amherst invented John warfare, but that's another discussion. And there were two great people there, many, but two of the headliners were Amory Lovins and William Hieronymus. And Hieronymus talked about 5 megawatt, very, very big windmills out in the ocean. And he showed a thing where they weren't going to be driven into the ocean bottom, that they would have these huge balancing ballast devices on the bottom, and they would actually float. And but there were chains that were going to go down to the ocean floor, but not actual poles. And Lake Erie has an advantage there in that it's relatively shallow, and I think actually it's probably reachable by poles, but I don't know if they do it that way. But these turbines in the lake, I think, are being built under with the Cleveland Municipal Utility. Is that right?
I believe you're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just would like to mention, Harvey, in terms of saltwater impacts, corrosion, and so forth, there's thousands of wind turbines in offshore waters now, particularly in Europe, or Denmark, or Germany, or the United Kingdom. They're kind of doing pretty well. I mean, that can be, I believe, dealt with. In terms of Lake Erie and the winds on Lake Erie, let me note that I have a sailboat. My wife and I have a sailboat, a Tartan sailboat, which we sail on, and it was built in Grand River, Ohio, near Cleveland, which is kind of like, why would a sailboat be built in Ohio? Well, there's Lake Erie with plenty of wonderful winds. So, yeah, Lake Erie is a place, another place where one could harvest wind energy.
Yeah, and the other thing that's changed, the whole dynamic now of renewable energy in the last 2 years or so has changed because of the rise of battery technology. And Elon Musk has built that mega factory in Nevada, which is actually, my understanding, is that the factory in Nevada that's building batteries is the square footage, the biggest building in the world. And, battery technology has just leaped ahead. And so this idea of intermittency, of the problem that, when the sun doesn't shine, blah, 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 is gone. Because there's really now a solution with battery technology. Are we hearing that discussed at all in the testimony in front of the...
Yeah, that was one issue, that was one component in the renewable energy picture, which was debated for years, storage. And now various technologies, particularly these new battery systems, they're here. They've arrived. They can be used. So the storage problem it's been solved.
Yeah. And House Bill 6, interestingly, in its early version, what it pretended to be a clean air bill, actually had funding set aside to build a utility-scale battery storage system as a pilot. But then the final version, when they showed their true colors, they just X'd that out.
Really?
Yeah.
So, and of course, what's incredibly infuriating here. Let me check. Pat, MARIDA, you haven't rejoined us, have you? Pat? Okay, what's incredibly infuriating here is that the Lordstown plant, among the many, the Lordstown plant in Ohio, this big, auto factory that employed thousands, hundreds anyway. I don't know. Do you know, Joe, how many people were working at Lordstown?
I want to say 4,000.
Yeah, it was enormous. Twice as many people as working at the nuclear plant. There wasn't a peep in the legislature about bailing out that plant. And I actually, when we had a rally, Joe, you set it up. It was a great rally. Thank you for doing that. As we were speaking, the leader of the Democratic Party in the Ohio Senate walked right through the rally. And I walked along. He wasn't that happy to have me as a companion there, but I was walking up the street with him, and I said, what is happening with Lordstown? Why don't you build convert Lordstown to a wind factory or build solar panels or batteries or LED lighting? And, he mumbled something about how they were going to do something related to transportation there. It's ridiculous. And I will say they just built, it's actually not so recent that it's been around. There's a $1 billion factory that was built in Buffalo, which is doing solar cells. And there was this idea that you would build these modular $1 billion factories to do various parts of the solar iconography here. But it's just outrageous. Nobody has said a word in Ohio about bailing out, Lordstown. It's ridiculous.
Right. And part of the irony, we also have the largest solar cell factory in America here at First Solar in Perrysburg, Ohio. And they came out and spoke against the bill, but they pushed it through the House anyway. Yeah, it's kind of amazing just how anti-environmental they've become on this.
And if I can just touch also on the issue of political leadership and political understanding, Andrew Cuomo, this is a good thing. He is pushed to close the Indian Point nuclear plants. There's two in operation, just 26 miles north of Times Square. They're right next to New York City because of the population of, we're talking about 22 million people within 50 miles of those Indian Point plants. Nevertheless, he's facilitated this bailout of these 4 upstate nuclear power plants. And this is during the time that this is 3 years ago when the bailout was being cooked up and this is a direct quote from Andrew Cuomo, nuclear has a role unless we're willing to go back to candles, which would be uncomfortable and inconvenient. We need energy generation. So Andrew Cuomo should,
moron.
Well, he should
How much do they
understand
pay
that.
this guy?
Well, he should understand that it isn't just near New York City that nuclear is dangerous. I mean, consider what occurred at Fukushima and Chernobyl and so forth. These upstate plants are just 300 miles. And they're right near Syracuse and Rochester, as I mentioned before, which are big cities in and of themselves. But if the wind is blowing from the north, just 300 miles south is the area around Indian Point. It's highly populated. So I think politicians that allow for nuclear either have to be educated or have to be thrown out of office.
Real quickly, we're almost to the end here. You guys are spectacular, and we could go on for another hour, and maybe we will another time. We got this Ohio story is the biggest story in the country right now, and it's got to be dealt with. And Joe, you're doing a great job. How do people get a hold of you, Joe DeMARE?
Oh, well, they can email me. I have a website. It's called Joe DeMARE for a Green Future, and that's DEMAREFOR, a Green Future. So you'll email me at Joe DeMARE for a Green Future. We're working with a lot of organizations. I'm actually political director of the Ohio Green Party. That's partly how I'm in this battle. But, I just wanted to say I was born in Rochester, and I remember when the Ginna nuclear plant had its steam tube collapse. And, I don't think, Cuomo is being very, very, evil.
Corrupt.
I use the word evil, being willing to sacrifice upstate New York and western New York to nukes and not being willing to sacrifice New York City to nukes.
Yeah, it's insane. Karl Grossman, how do people get a hold of you? Well, just go to my website, Karl Grossman, one word, and call.com. And also, listeners could go to the website of my television production company. It's envirovideo.com. I've been hosting a program called Enviro Close-Up with Karl Grossman for now 28 years. It's aired nationally on Free Speech TV, and you can watch the programs actually on the website of envirovideo.com, and more information is on my own website called the books I've written, the articles I've written, and so forth at karlgrossman.com.
Wow, right on time. Thank you guys. Tremendous. No nukes, everybody. We'll see you next week at the Solartopia Green Power and Wellness Show. Thank you.
Either way, we got
Thank
what
you.
we needed when the sun shone down on the Garden of Eden.
Don't you know we're gonna have a Solartopia, Solartopia.